Welcome, good day, good morning. Welcome everyone to this Indeed Knowledge Series webinar on research on the efficacy of the Family Support Program and Exit Program in the Netherlands. We're very glad to be joined today by three good friends and excellent colleagues in the field, Amber van Suljekom, Fenna Keizer, and Martin van de Donk. My name is Kai Brand Jacobson. I'm part of the team in the Indeed project. For today, we're going to start with just a brief introduction of the project and then take us straight into the webinar, which we've all come together for today. So for those who may not be familiar with it yet, Indeed is a major initiative that has been supported by the European Commission, bringing together 19 partners, universities, law enforcement agencies, government ministries, civil society and community service organizations, and others from 15 countries across the European Union. The focus in Indeed is supporting an evidence-based approach to designing and evaluating preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization initiatives. You can find out more about the project by visiting the Indeed website at indeedproject.eu. There you'll also find some of the many innovative tools and resources that have been developed by the project, including the new and revised Indeed Toolkit, which is a practical step-by-step guide for how to implement evaluations, evidence-based evaluations in PCVE and de-radicalization programming. We also have e-guidebooks on evidence-based evaluation and on designing evidence-based initiatives in the field. And one thing that we've woven into the project throughout is our focus on what is called GELSA, gender, ethical, legal, and societal aspects of PCVE programming and of evaluation in the field. In fact, we'll also be asking all of you joining us today to do a GELSA assessment of this event at the end and let us know how well we've engaged with these topics in today's discussion. And as many of you know, Indeed is also bringing forward a fairly comprehensive knowledge series made up of live webinars, video interviews, podcasts, learning notes, and more. And we'll be sharing some information at the end of this webinar about the upcoming events within that series. But to take us to today's event, again, our focus in today's webinar is on how to do evaluation well, sharing from research carried out with the head of the Exit program in the Netherlands and bringing together the evaluators and the evaluated. We have Amber van Suljekom, who is the head of the Dutch National Support Center for Extremism. Amber has been working at the Dutch National Support Center for the past 5 years. She previously worked as a researcher and consultant and was involved in several projects, working groups, and knowledge hubs in the field of countering radicalization and extremism. Fenna Keizer is a senior advisor at RadarAdvies. Fenna has worked as a senior advisor at RadarAdvies for a number of years now. She's worked on, among others, the effect evaluation of the Exit and Family Support Program of the Dutch National Support Center for Extremism and has been involved in the Radicalization Awareness Network. And we're joined also by Martin van de Donk, also a senior advisor at RadarAdvies. Martin has worked as an advisor in the field of youth policy, and since 2012, he works almost full-time in this field, both in the Netherlands and as an advisor, trainer, and evaluator throughout Europe. He's been involved in the Radicalization Awareness Network since its inception, where he supported working groups on rehabilitation, victims of terrorism, prison and probation, and foreign terrorist fighters. Amber, Fenna, Martin, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and I'm glad to hand over the presentation to you.
Perfect. Yes, thanks to all that are joining us online, and thanks to the Indeed platform for this great opportunity to share some of our experiences. So some introductory remarks beforehand about evaluation in the field of preventing and countering extremism. So evaluating services in general can provide a valuable opportunity for learning. Understanding what works or what doesn't work in the field of preventing and countering extremism enables continuous refinement, adaptation, and improvement of interventions that are focused on either the prevention of extremism or on detachment from extremist environments. We find it important in this field to decrease the risk of unintentionally creating ineffective or counterproductive practices. Evaluating our practices can contribute to that. So today, Maarten, Fenna, and I will share our experiences with the evaluation of two of the services of the Dutch National Support Center for Extremism. And after we briefly dive into the content overview of our webinar, I will introduce my organization and the evaluated services, and Fenna will then introduce RadarAdvies.
So thank you, Amber. So my name is Fenna, and next to me is our Maarten and Amber. First, I would like to share with you very briefly what we are going to present to you this morning. First, as Amber already told you, we will explain a bit more about the Dutch National Support Center and RadarAdvies. Then Amber will dive into the conditions and specific steps for practitioner-evaluator cooperation, and she will explain a bit more about the database that she and her organization have created in preparation for this evaluation. Then I will guide you through the evaluation setup and the research questions of this evaluation, and we will share some findings and recommendations from both the evaluation of the FORSA program, so the exit program, and the family support program. And then we will end with some lessons learned from both the evaluated perspective and the evaluating perspective. And of course, then the floor is open to all of you for questions if you have any. So let's go to Amber first.
Thank you. Yes, so the Dutch National Support Center, it is a part of a larger NGO, and it is funded by the Dutch government, the Ministry of Justice and Security. We were set up around 2014, 2015, and the organization offers several national services, such as individual counseling and family support, but also anonymous consultation and research. We focus on different forms of extremism, from jihadism to far-right and anti-institutional extremism. So our overall goal is to contribute to a safe and flourishing civil society in the Netherlands by applying a soft approach towards preventing and countering extremism. So I will briefly highlight two of our main services, family support and the exit program. These are the services that have been evaluated by RadarAdvies in 2021. The services are focused on two directly connected groups of citizens, the individuals who have been or are currently being radicalized, and the immediate family members or friends of these individuals. So family support mainly focuses on providing support and social care to the family members of the radicalized individuals, and its goal is to combat radicalization of other family members, such as brothers or sisters, and to help prevent the perpetration of criminal acts. The exit facility was set up in October 2015, and this one focuses on adults and young people who harbor extremist ideas or who are or have been involved in extremist networks.
And then I will also share something about RadarAdvies. We are a consultancy firm in the social domain. We are based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I think the organization exists around 35 years now. And in those years, we have worked both in the Netherlands, for example, municipalities or ministries, as well as in the EU. For example, we worked on the radicalization awareness for about awareness network for about 12 years. And yeah, we do this in all kinds of different projects. We do project management, we give advice, and we do research. For example, we conducted the evaluation that we will talk about today. We are active in several domains, such as youth care and services, a team dedicated to, for example, equal opportunities, and we have a team dedicated to preventing and countering violent extremism. So that's just a little bit about RadarAdvies before we go into the content.
The conditions. Yeah. So implementing an evaluation didn't come without challenges. So now I'd like to take a moment to talk about the importance of deciding on the objectives of the evaluation. When we were considering evaluating, it was important to look into the objectives of the interventions themselves. What defines success in these programs, and can we truly measure that? In addition, we needed to decide on the right moment of evaluation and to think about who could and should carry it out. So around 2020, our organization celebrated its 5 years existence. This meant 5 years of experience with counseling within the family support program and the exit programs. And we decided that would be a good moment for the evaluations, since only then we would have sufficient data of cases or trajectories. So one of the challenges within our process of evaluation was navigating through the motives and concerns of different stakeholders. In our case, periodic evaluation of our services was actually included in the conditions of our yearly grant. So in short, at first, the main motives of conducting the evaluation were focused on legitimization, transparency, and public accountability. When discussing the upcoming evaluations with the ministry, our funder, we then voiced our wish and interest to use the evaluation as an opportunity for learning. This is why our organization had a bigger role in commissioning the evaluation, eventually broadening the objectives in the end. So in the end, this led to more interest and participation from practitioners of our organization. So by commissioning the evaluation of efficacy of both the family support program and the exit program, the main objective was to have an independent external party research the impacts and contribution of these two services. This would contribute to the validation of our work, and in addition, those insights could be used to further fine-tune and improve our way of working if necessary. So this resulted in quite a challenge for the setup of the evaluation, because the motives of different stakeholders involved were, as before mentioned, different. So we approached RadarAdvies as the evaluator because of their knowledge about and experiences in this field. Later on, Maarten and Venna will tell us more about the setup of the evaluation. So evaluation requires good preparation from the start. I'll reflect shortly on specific steps that we took as a preparation of the evaluation. The quality and the insights you can generate from it highly depend on what data is available and how the data is registered. So, to further dive into the collection of the relevant data. One of the important steps is to take into account the ethical dilemmas. Measuring effectiveness requires sharing data with an external evaluator for research purposes. This is why we needed to make sure it is permitted to use the anonymous data for research and evaluation. For this, we used consent statements at the start of each trajectory. So within the method of both of our services, we use a list of interventions and objectives. Our practitioners use this for their registration in their client files. So to prepare for the evaluation, we further fine-tuned this long list of interventions and objectives and split them into categories. We created a list of measurable parameters. For example, is someone propagating violence? Was someone convicted before? Or how well someone is integrated into society? So from a span of no integration to positive integration, or slight, minimal to fully. Through clear instructions, we collected all the relevant data anonymously from the client files, and we transferred them into a database. So I want to point out this transfer of information of the client files into the database. So one of the challenges with that was the risk of subjectiveness. Originally, the information written down in the client files solely had the objective to report the progress of the counseling, so not the objective of evaluation. So to mitigate this risk of subjectiveness, we ensured that within the transfer of qualitative information from the client files to anonymous data, that we applied the so-called 4 I principle with a researcher and a case manager. We also offered the evaluator, when evaluating, to check and compare the anonymized client files with the dataset. So it was quite time consuming, but before the start of the evaluation, we eventually created 2 datasets with info about personal situation, background, risk assessment, protective factors, the length of the different trajectories, interventions, and data from a scale of self-sufficiency and insights in possible extremist attitudes. So this is an example of how we transfer the information to the data. Each of the objectives you can see on the left-hand side corresponds with a category in the Excel document. So then the numbers are filled that indicate, for example, slightly to minimal, to improving, to full scale, to achieved. You see the 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4. So after this, I will give the digital floor to Maarten and Fenna, who will share their experiences as our evaluator.
Yeah, so after this extensive preparation of Amber, this is where we came in as RadarAdvies. And we started to set up the evaluation. And I will briefly guide you through the steps that we took in this evaluation. And afterwards, I will also share the actual research questions. What we first did is a literature research. Of course, we had a lot of documents from the Dutch Center available, such as their working methods, but also their objectives, for example. So we analyzed them, and we also looked at a lot of scientific research that was already out there, to also see what kind of parameters were used in scientific research, and we combined them with the parameters that LSE had provided to us. We drafted the theory of change. Of course, there was a lot of information available also already from the center, so we could draft this theory of change, which was the basis of the evaluation. Then we did an analysis of the database that Amber just already shared something about already. But in addition to that, we also collected data in a qualitative way. For example, with interviews with team members of the team, former participants in both programs, and stakeholders that they collaborated with. And I see it's not mentioned here, but we also analyzed a number of client files to get more in-depth information from those files as well. Yeah, and above all of this, there was a supervisory committee that helped us with that overlooked the research and helped us with everything throughout the process. Then I will go to the research questions. So as you can see, it's quite a lot of text, but I will just briefly guide you through it. So the main research question was, what insights does science offer on the contribution and possible efficacy of individual guidance when it comes to preventing and countering violent radicalization and extremism? So this was the basis of the literature research as well. And how does this scientific knowledge and LSE's practice relate to each other, which was quite interesting to compare as well. Then to what extent has the care and assistance provided by the exit program contributed to the intended objectives? And what can be said then about the effects and effective elements? And lastly, one of the questions was to what extent the guidance of the exit program contributed to strengthening the protective factors. This was mainly, these were the main questions for the exit program. Of course, we also had a look at the family support program. And here also the main question was to what extent have the care and assistance provided by this family support program contributed to the intended objectives? And then the next research questions are the sub-objectives of this program, such as providing support. So how did family members experience this support? To what extent has the program contributed to prevent further radicalization of both radicalized persons, but also radicalization of the family members of these radicalized persons? And to what extent has the cooperation between the family and the authorities been restored? And have there been clients directed from the family support program to the exit program? So these were broadly the questions that we aimed to answer, yeah, with the setup that I just shared with you. And then we thought it would be interesting to share some of the main highlights that came out of this research. And for that, I will give the floor to Maarten first.
Thank you, and good morning also from my side. I will present something on the findings of FORSA, so the disengagement program. And the result actually was quite positive when we look at the reinforcement of the protective factors to renounce extremist violence and distancing themselves from an extremist network to a great majority of cases. The point we have to make here is this was only possible, of course, to measure for the cases where data were available. And we had quite some cases where this was available, and I will show this later to you in the next slide with an example. And we saw that there was a difference in the positive effects, really positive. It was on resilience, on willing to act, ideology, and social relationship with parents, a disengagement of online extremist network. And it was more moderate and unclear when it came to relationships with in-person extremist environments and development of identity and practical matters. And perhaps the last is good to explain you a little bit, apart from really the more working on views. FORSA also works on practical things, how to be rehabilitated later into society, like things like education, work, and so on. Although it's also FORSA is taking the first step being a national expert center, and later on people are being transferred to more local municipalities to work on the rest of the trajectory, and also are more working on their practical matters there. Then a second finding was that the feeling of trust, one of the main things we got out of the theory of change based on our literature research, that the feeling of trust there was, the success was remarkable. We talked with both clients and also with other stakeholders in the fields, and it was a really positive outcome there. And then what we further, and a third point saw, is that the information in the way it's being shaped now, so actually it's the reconstruction of all data now made in a kind of trajectory information, is a very useful development for two things, of course, for research, but also we do think in the day-to-day work it's more, it's better to at least see what is happening and that you can also compare with other cases. Then I have an example for you here on ideology, and I am aware of the fact that you don't speak Dutch, and at least a lot of you, and that is a lot of numbers you're seeing, but I think it's good to explain you a little bit. This is the example we had about ideology. And what we did here, you see in the top of the schedule, you see -4 to 4. There is an insight matrix extremism scale, which was being used by the case managers who did a start when they had the first intake, and also when they had the final the final discussion with the client. And so 0 would be that there's no radicalization whatsoever, and 4 would be alarming. And what we did is actually what we measured at least the project managers, the case managers measured at the beginning. We compared this to the final outcome. And so you can get scores from -4, where someone was completely radicalized, to completely de-radicalized, to 4, where you would have that the person was not radicalized in the beginning, to in the end completely radicalized. And we looked at this at a few things, like first is perspective on life, then on view on extremism, view on mankind or humanity, view on society, the world view, and the view of conflict. And we then just measure this, and what you see happening, and you see this, what the results in the last three columns. You see that we start with the average starting value, for example, for the first one is the 3.2, and the end value was 2.2. So there was an effect of 1.0. And this sounds very mathematic, but of course we have to realize this is based on data made by the case manager. So that's one point. It also shows, and I think that's one of the main outcomes, and this is also the reason I want to show to you to this today, is that very often we see that people don't go back from 4 to 0. So there might be some remainder of, like in, for example, here the ideology, which would perhaps need some aftercare also when going back to society, when going back to other trajectories. So we see all positive outcomes here, which is really good. But we also see here that sometimes not all the objectives you would ideally have are being met.
Yes, then also some highlights from the family support program. Overall, I think it was slightly more difficult to evaluate the family support program than the exit program. Overall, we can say that clients feel supported in general, which was, of course, one of the objectives of this program. And if we fill that in a little bit more, for example, you can say that they feel better supported to deal with emotions, they feel less lonely. So these are examples that actually come from the clients. Of course, when it comes to the objective of the prevention of radicalization or further radicalization of the individual and other family members, this was slightly more challenging to evaluate, but there are some interesting outcomes. For example, we can see from the data that was gathered, so the quantitative data in the database, that for 1 quarter, the concerns about the radicalized individual in the family actually seem reduced after the support. And this also applies to the family members of the radicalized individuals. And that was for, I think, 1/3. So that's something we can get from the data. But of course, then there's still 3/4 of the people left to say something about. So we also looked at some other parameters that could say something about the prevention of radicalization. These were partly parameters that were gathered by the LSE, but also some parameters that, or indicators that we got from the scientific knowledge. For example, we could see that there was a very clear and increased knowledge and skills on signals of radicalization and radicalization in general in the families. For the parenting style, this was harder to make a clear statement about, because the parenting style, for example, was not included in the database, but it was, so to say, a good practice in the scientific literature to work on the parenting style in families. So we could see some improvements, for example, from the qualitative interviews, but not from the data. So that's, it's slightly more difficult to make a strict statement about. We see, for example, also that 1/3 has reduced problems at home. Some were effectively liaised with local aid workers, for example, to solve problems at home. So these are some statements we can make about that. The social network reinforcement was, I think, by far the most challenging, maybe also a point of attention in the program. But we do have to take into account a lot of context factors within this family support program, and also in the exit program, but maybe even more in the family support program, that really influence the success of the program in the end. There were a lot of examples that of context factors that could have an influence, which makes it harder to make strict statements about the success of a program. But you can think of government measures, such as taking away the Dutch nationality of people, which can have an influence in the end on the process of de-radicalization. Insecurity, or for example, is my family member coming home from a conflict zone, or will he or she not come home? What will be the sentence afterwards? So these are things that can have an influence. For example, the participation of other family members. So in one family, there might be one person that is radicalized. In others, there may be more. So these are very, things that change per situation and per family. Also the problems in the family, of course. The time we conducted this evaluation was in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, which also had a very big influence on, on the society and also on these families as well. So all in all, a lot of context factors to take into account there. I will share a very brief example of how the data was shown for the family support program, which is slightly different than for the exit program, because here it was more, the data was collected in form of a change. So here you can see in the first column, it says less, then same, then worsened. And then there are two columns with unknown. Well, you can see here that in a quarter of the cases, the development of worries about radicalized individuals, for example, had decreased. So this is where we can actually make a statement about prevention of further radicalization. But also in 20% of the cases, for example, the worries were the same. But again, this has to do with a lot of other context factors as well. So this is an example of how the data was reflected there. Then I think we will go into the recommendations, and I will give the floor to Maarten for that.
Yes, the recommendations, I think we just showed you the example of ideology, which was very well measured in the sense that we had success indicators and we could know what was the good direction. We also saw that some factors in life were not that well described yet. So we have said, well, perhaps it's better to operationalize success indicators for identity and for resilience. Then, as Amber just told you how they have been working on uniformity in the registration, afterwards it's reconstructed for the past. We have said, please do work on uniformity in the registration. And this is also an important part because in the initial phase, it was just the taking notes for the case manager themselves. But now we want to have uniformity. Also, we want to use it for other purposes. So then it's more important to underline this. And then there was already a kind of overview in interventions, but it was never made clear why an intervention was chosen for a certain case, what the objectives were per program. And we said, perhaps it's good if you have this list and intervention of interventions to say what objective we would have when implementing it or not. Then we recommended to develop the data set further and to involve an independent researcher when filling it. Two reasons for this. The first thing is that data set, as it has been made now, will get outdated if you don't work further on it. And it's really a very precious thing, we do think. And to involve the independent researchers also, that we have less the chance that the case manager is determining what is happening and we have a more objective view on it. Then, and this is one we didn't tell you about yet, but just like all, I think, exit programs, there's an intake phase and then you start the trajectory. And we saw very often that this division was not really clear because there is a whole process of trust building. And then at a certain point you say, now we start the work. But if you already have someone in the room who has an immediate demand or a question or a need, we very often saw that the case managers already start helping them out, also with the objective, of course, to gain the trust. But then actually you see that before the tragic phase really started, already measures were taken. And this, of course, makes it more difficult to measure the effect of the trajectory. Then we also said collect data on long-term impact. And this is a difficult one in the sense that we now only have the data of people who are just about to leave the rehabilitation project. And very often what we see then, people are still very much into that they were successful in change, but we do not know how sustainable it is. So it would be good to see how the clients are doing after, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. We tried to look a bit for this by interviewing some of the former clients, but of course this was a very small sample we used. And it was also the clients who still wanted to talk to us. So that didn't really give a good impression on that. Finally, 2 points. Now it was very much based all on Islamist extremism or religious-inspired extremism. This had to do that this program was set up in the time that this was the biggest problem and actually was also the reason for setting it up. We now see that all kind of other ideologies are also coming in, and so we should work on research on this. It was also in the beginning more, especially for the rehabilitation, also very much male centered, let's say. And as we see the developments in extremism in general, it's good also to look at gender. The remark on the stakeholders is that we saw that the stakeholders on one hand were very positive about the people working at the unit. On the other hand, they were not completely aware of the competences the case managers have. They were very much thinking like it's more like a coach for the people who have to rehabilitate and not receive, for example, not seeing how the religious expertise, but also the expertise in other fields could be of added value also for the stakeholders in their work. This leads to the lessons learned and the follow-up from the perspective of the evaluator. We think it's important when we look at the process is that you should manage expectations. So there should always be transparency about the evaluations and the evaluators' limitations and boundaries. The other one is work together with all stakeholders and taking all input seriously. Like, for example, the point I just mentioned about the stakeholders, it's easy to say, why don't the stakeholders listen to me? And we were already clear what we are doing. But no, that's a very defensive idea. And we would say, if people say we don't exactly know what they are doing, then the question to you is, what can we do about this? Regardless of how often you already told this or how clear it is to yourself. And then we saw that the close and low threshold contact between the evaluators and the practitioners was a really important point here. We had the freedom from the organization to talk to different kinds of people within the organization. And we also took sufficient time for this, also that if there were questions from the practitioners, why are you asking this, is that we could answer this in a very quiet way. And I think last but not least, it's also very important here is that we are, apart from evaluators, we also pretend to be PVE, CVE experts. So you are on the same page when it comes to knowledge, but also to the passion about working on these matters.
Yes, and then the lessons learned from our perspective. So we were, of course, very grateful for these conclusions and also for the useful recommendations pointed out by RadarAdvies. So from then on, and still, we are trying to create more unity in registration. This is an ongoing process in which we periodically train our practitioners team. We also still focus on further developing our services and its methods. For example, using these scales for various life areas we discussed before when assessing someone's behavior, the use of several success indicators, and our collection of interventions and objectives to further sharpening that when mapping out a plan of action for our clients. So at the moment, our practitioners fill in these scales for their clients at the start and then every 3 months, and also at the end of each trajectory. And the purpose of that is that we might see a shift or even progress in these indicators. So that's very useful information. One of the recommendations was also translating anonymized information to the databases directly and more automatically and periodically. Therefore, we now make use of these standardized formats and we make use of a digital registration system. This is very helpful to unify the databases and make them more objective, of course. So I want to close with sharing this notion that it can be quite a big and scary step to set up an evaluation for your services. It can gain great insights of progress and ideas to further develop your methods. But on the other hand, the effort and hard work from your practitioners is examined for its effectiveness. So that is why for us, especially the learning element of the evaluation was very important. So I think we now come to the end of our presentation of our webinar, and we hope by sharing our experience, we create more awareness and inspire other organizations to incorporate evaluation in their projects. We thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amber, Fen, and Martin. Wonderful to hear that case study. Thank you for taking us so in depth, both into the work that was being done and then the evaluation, how you did it, and sharing with us some of the lessons and the reflections that you took from it. We now have in the remainder of our space in the webinar the opportunity for engaging with questions and discussions together. We already have some that have been shared. I will read those out to you while inviting, if others have additional questions that you would like to ask, please do so. So if we can, I'm going to start with a question from Isabella Pelogia, who thanks you for a very interesting presentation. She asked the question, I was wondering how you manage the pathway from completely de-radicalized to out in society and the sustainability of the program on the long term. Are they, while they're in the program with you, given tools on how to deal with resurging attempts or risks of further radicalization? Martin, you had mentioned when looking at the scale that they don't go to zero and they may need aftercare. Were you aware, or do you know if aftercare is there? Are there programs in place for that? And Fenna, you spoke about the need to prevent further radicalization, that was harder to prove. So the program engages with people through exit processes to a certain point. What happens after? And in the program, did you support participants, support your clients with also tools that can help them to be resilient and resistant to possible radicalization in the future?
Yes, I will briefly reflect on the approach we use within our organization. So that might give more of a notion of how we work and on which life aspects we work. And then maybe we can also reflect afterwards on the aftercare when our organization stops with the approach and when the trajectories end. So within our exit program, we actually provide the following services. So we encourage critical reflection. That is one of our main focuses. And we also offer trauma counseling. We focus on empowerment in relation to the network and also in relation to the X network, so to make them more resilient. It is also to support clients to coming to terms with, for example, experiences in war zones. We encourage clients to have new social connection through work, through studies, to work placement. So we kind of focus also on these building and rebuilding of social network as a means to create protective factors. And that is, one of our main focuses really within the exit program. So yeah, basically the boosting of resilience of these individuals, that is what we mainly focus on.
Yes, and indeed, and this is one of the challenges I think you see in the Netherlands, but also actually throughout Europe, is that very often there always comes a time when it's time to hand over. And in this case, we're talking about the national unit. And so the organization is like this, that in the end, the local municipalities take over. But then there are a few challenges. Is there a warm takeover from that side? So can indeed, in this case, the exit unit transfer their information and transfer the person to do this new system? The second thing which might happen, and that is a big challenge, is that sometimes when there is no obligation to do things, you can have services, but people are not going there. So that makes it quite hard. And perhaps as a third point, it's important to say is that I know that LSE is also working in this way, is that sometimes people after their treatment get into insecure times and then feel insecure also about their state of de-radicalization, let's put it this way. And then it's the question, can you still call them for a short chat with your former case manager or not? And this makes also the sustainability of exit facilities so very important, that if you feel insecure, and a lot of people feel insecure after a certain period of time through live events or seeing what's happening in the world, that people can come back for a short time, not to do the whole show again, but more to more pinpointed direct aid.
Thank you so much. We have another question, actually 2 questions that relate to the theory of change that you mentioned, or a few of them. So one by Kutsanayo Shiri was asking if it would be possible to receive the theory of change, if that is available to be shared so other people can learn from it. Noreen Elvira Herki also asks about the theory of change. Is it program specific, case specific, or both? And I had a question to clarify. When you were introducing your approach and the work you did in the evaluation, it sounded as if you said that you began by developing a theory of change. Was the theory of change developed from yourselves as evaluators about the program, or was there a theory of change already developed from the program itself, which you then evaluated?
Yeah, so maybe first of all about the theory of change and whether you are able to look at it. It is still in Dutch, so that is a bit of a problem for some people, I think. The research is out there with a short summary in English, so it is public. So I can recommend to look at that. So far, it hasn't been translated into English, but the rest of the documents. So maybe that is something to work on in the future.
Yeah.
Then the second question on the theory of change, whether it's program specific, case specific, or both. I think it was mainly program specific, which is why also one of our recommendations was to in the end have a list of interventions and their objectives linked. So it's also easier to make a theory of change, for example, per intervention. But this was mainly for the programs itself. And then lastly, I think maybe it's a question for you to answer. Maybe Kai, you can remind me what the last question was on the theory of change.
If it was already in place in the program,
yes,
I think.
yeah.
Yes.
So I think we have an approach where we look at different life aspects, and within these life aspects, we've written down certain objectives per life aspect. What are the protective factors in place, so we can really measure those. And that is also the background of the scale we use. So our practitioners have the scale that they have to fill in every 3 months, and with the start and at the beginning. And that is mainly the background also of that scale is these different life aspects and the expected change in these life aspects. And I can really recall them as well. It's willingness to violence, social relations, on ideology, on protective factors, identity, and risk factors. So we take these into account. And on these different life aspects, there has to be a notion of change.
And I think it's good to add here that just like a lot of other exit programs throughout Europe, we have seen that people have just started because the problem was out there, and they didn't really start very often with a theory of change. And this was actually the reason why we, together with the expertise unit, reconstructed the theory of change. There was already a lot out there. There were certainly notions. People were not doing just things because they like doing things, but it was good to restructure this and also to revisit this, because this is also what we quite often see, that in the initial phase, there is a theory of change, but then practice overtakes reality, and you see that people are not longer going by this trajectory. So it was also really a reconstruction which we did.
And it's almost as an extra recommendation to evaluate, because this makes it more explicit. And because you start from developing a method, and then when with evaluation, you reflect on your method, and then it makes the theory of change very explicit. So I think that's very helpful as well. So another point to state why evaluation is so important, I guess.
It's a very important learning and insight. Thank you very much both for sharing that. It's actually one of the aspects that has been very much brought forward through the Indeed project, where when looking at designing evidence-based initiatives, we strongly encourage practitioners and agencies involved to actually include development of a theory of change from the beginning of our work, really identifying and making explicit what is our logic of why we think that A, the problem we're addressing is the one that needs to be addressed. B, the solution that we're trying to achieve is actually the right solution to that problem. And C, that the strategy or approach we're taking is the one that will help to move from that problem to that solution, and then to really look concretely into what we're actually doing, what types of activities, how we're doing them, and why and how we believe that those activities will lead to the impact or the results that we're trying to achieve. And developing a theory of change in the design and planning phase of a project, you used that word that comes up so often, Amber. It makes it explicit. It can make explicit our logic, our understanding, and it also can then give us the opportunity to identify, are we making any assumptions? Are there any weak links between some of what we are doing and the results we think it will have, or possible other factors, missing links, things that should be added to increase the likelihood of having that result, or things that should be changed because maybe they're not actually what's really needed in that context or doesn't fit with those. So the importance of developing a theory of change. And sometimes you could even do ex ante evaluation. So evaluate that program logic, evaluate that theory even before beginning. And one of the things that we've seen is about 90% of almost everything that will fail or go wrong in a program can actually be identified before you begin, if we really think through and test the logic and test the design. Could I ask you, you have such a breadth of experience working with exit programming in the Netherlands, and then with RAN work also learning from cases more broadly. Some of the issues that come up that I'd love to invite your thoughts and reflection on. One is when you're looking at those who've gone through the exit programming and the support that you provided, how does that relate to the scale of need, the scale of the problem? So, for example, we've seen sometimes in cases or countries where you might have some dozens of people, some hundreds or some thousands that go through exit programming, but the number of people in the concern group is actually much larger than that. So one, a question about scale. Two, a question of orientation. In our exit programs, are we reaching those who would want to exit already, who maybe are less entrenched or who are susceptible to exit? Are we, or did you experience being able to reach perhaps those who might be much more entrenched, much more embedded in groups? And are there things that can be done for that? And the last question is, we have exit, and what about concurrent or ongoing recruitment? So if we're exiting some, do we see that that's impacting the total numbers of people, which is not the orientation of an exit program, but does that area need to be addressed as well? So three questions out there inviting your thoughts and reflections on exit programming.
Shall I start? And then you
Yes.
might fill in the gaps. Yes, so as an exit program in the Netherlands, we don't keep an overview of all the radicalized or possible radicalized people in the Netherlands. That is something, the overview that is, I think with the ministry, they do have these numbers and they do have an indication of how large the scale is. But we do have other support facilities in the Netherlands next to our exit program. We also have a local approach where the municipalities have sometimes their own local approach to radicalized individuals and their family members as well. So in case of scale, I think I cannot really give you a great answer to that, because I think we have about 15 to 20 clients each year, and a trajectory usually lasts around a year and a half. After that, we don't say that they are fully integrated into society, but they have the protective factors that are there that can support them to have a healthy integration into society. So that's on the first question. And so we're not really oriented on the full scale in the Netherlands. Another notion that I want to mention to maybe answer another one of your questions is that our programs are voluntary. So the route of the clients to us is our approach is we offer on demand, exactly. So we get our clients through municipalities or through local healthcare organizations or through family members. So the clients come to our organization voluntary, and that is one of our main focuses as well, because then people are really susceptible and motivated to work on their reintegration into society as well.
Yes, I think it's important to add here is that, for example, for family support, this can be a bit different, where people also directly went to the support center. And also very important that sometimes from the family support, there will be clients also for the DRAD or the rehabilitation process. And these are mostly not the people who are very much intrinsically motivated yet, but it's more like my family wants me to change, or my family wants me to come here or to be here. When it comes to recruitment, I think actually I would like to use this question as a plea for my side, is that we very often see that people say if radicalization is in place, we need a DRAD or a rehabilitation program. But actually, that's the end of a whole trajectory where you would need primary and secondary prevention as well. And this is not what we have been looking at here, because if we look at the work of the LSE, that's really tertiary prevention. But this is about doing the work in schools. This is about working in youth centers. This is also about what local municipalities are doing. And I think there it's very important to have, like in the Dutch and the Danish approach, which is more or less similar, that you have good info houses or safety houses, as they are called in the Netherlands, where all these partners from primary prevention to tertiary prevention come together, and you work together on the recruitment there. Of course, there can be a vulnerability for re-radicalization of people who are in tertiary prevention, sometimes back into the same direction and sometimes in the other direction. And I think that's a point where also LSE has been looking at. You could also see this from some of the stats I just showed, that some of the people radicalized a bit more when in rehabilitation than it was the case that there was cases of re-recruitment.
Yes, and maybe to add to that, I think within the broad spectrum of disengagement to de-radicalization, there are certain types of interventions that are in place. You can also have this great collaboration between repression interventions and preventative interventions. And so we work also together with prison systems that are more focused, of course, on the repression interventions as well. And I think to work on disengagement and to work on de-radicalization, you need both aspects. So you need both the repression measures and also the preventative measures, such as that we're trying to create a change in attitude, in worldview, and basically a collaboration between short-term interventions and long-term interventions.
Maybe we could focus a little for a moment specifically on that, because you've both spoken to this, Amber and Martin. And Amber, when you were speaking earlier, you were mentioning that there are different approaches and different actors who have responsibility for these approaches. Martin, you mentioned the experiences in the Netherlands and Denmark and the safety houses, which bring all of the actors together. This is one of the findings that has come up not only in the work of the Indeed project, but in many. And there has been this increasing emphasis on the importance of having multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral approaches, a comprehensive approach, looking at early stage prevention all the way through the breadth of instruments and strategies. Could you share with us, just from your own experiences, I know it wasn't the focus of the evaluation, but how effectively do you feel does that work in the Netherlands? Is there the connecting between these different actors and interventions? When you were looking at the specific case of the exit program, did you in any way engage with also understanding how the work of others contributes at other points along the trajectory?
So I think it is very important, and we also use that within our organization, but I also think it is very important to collaborate with different stakeholders, because when you have a client, there are many stakeholders involved usually. And I think one of the success factors, I don't know if I can state it as that, but something very important is this multidisciplinary approach, because you have so many life aspects that you want to create protective factors on, that you have to collaborate with different disciplines, such as, for example, if someone has a trauma, you really want to ensure and you really want to counsel on that trauma, and you might have to work together with a healthcare organization as well. And we offer that within our organization, but sometimes it is more useful to use another organization, or for example, a project, a mentor project from a municipality, or you have to work together with the terrorist department of the prison system, because someone has a program going on there. So you really have to collaborate and tailor-made. You have to make a tailor-made program for each client, I guess, to really combine all these interventions.
Yeah, and then those are the partners, but you also have other partners that offer very practical matters, like some people need help with financial issues or housing issues, and there are also a lot of practical partners in place, so to say. And what we didn't do is evaluate the support that was provided by all of those partners. So because there are so many, we did look at whether the center was successful in transferring them to these local aid workers in order to see how this collaboration went. We also spoke to the partners to ask how they experienced this collaboration between the centers. So it is definitely a very important point to look at that as well. It's not something that was included in the evaluation, unless, of course, the client spoke about it, and then it was something we could include, but not we couldn't say something about that overall.
All right. I have a few other questions that have been shared with me directly. One is very interesting. I wonder if you could speak to it. And it's asking, in your experience engaging in casework with your clients, those who have been in exit, did it also give you insight into the factors of their radicalization? Can we, working in the field of PCVE and de-radicalization overall and looking at evidence-based programming, part of what we've been looking at in the Indeed project is also risk and vulnerability factors and factors of resilience as well. And from your experience engaging with those who have themselves become radicalized and involved in various groups, were you able to understand some of the factors which may have contributed to that experience?
So yes, I think there are certain risk factors that also come up in research and in conclusion papers, and we often look at that. But in practice, so what we see within our organization is there's no checklist for radicalization, and each case is different, and it's very dependent on someone's personal life and personal experience. And there are different factors that can make a person more vulnerable and prone to going down a certain path. So there's many pathways, I guess, to being radicalized and to go into an extremist environment. So you have these push and pull factors, of course, and I guess they're broadly known, but it is often an individual pathway to radicalization and extremism, and these different push and pull factors that can trigger a person in his or her process of radicalization. I think every person in their process is different. So that's why we look at these different life aspects, and we just want to scale or want to know what is in place there? Is there a protective factor in place, or is it absent? And can we work on that? And I think that is the most important to do.
I think it's important to state here also is that you see that in a lot of exit programs, there is a lot of work on the own biography of the person, because if you would ask the person in the beginning, why did you radicalize? That very often is a kind of self-composed story. And of course, that not are necessarily the risk factors which are really there. It's the perception of the client, it's the perception of the people you want to help. And what we very often see when doing a more biographical work, then all along the road, the real risk factors come on the table. Very often people just say, like, and now take a very simple example, I was bullied at school and therefore I radicalized. But on the other hand, we also do know that not all people who were bullied at school radicalized in the end. So there's more to it. So it's also this, I think it's an important thing about the reflection with your client is to think, what were the causes that I changed to this? But also by that opening up the possibility that you could also change into another direction, that it was not meant to be that you were radicalized. And so, yes, you get an insight in the factors, but I also do think you get, first of all, also a good insight in the factors which are the perceived experiences of the client group, why they think they changed.
Fenna, did you want to add into that as well?
Yeah, very briefly, because we did say some things on, for example, effective elements in the support. We couldn't go as specific as pinpointing specific protective factors, for example, or risk factors to work on, because as Maarten and Amber already mentioned, that's very case specific. But yeah, you can say something about effective elements, for example, in gaining a trustful relationship with your client, and then through that process, making sure that you reach the objectives with the client. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to say something about that because it's so case specific.
It's interesting, this dynamic that you've all mentioned, because each individual's trajectory is certainly very case specific. What we've seen also in discussion with exit programs and also with those working on prevention of radicalization, or in previous work, we've done interviews with people that were in far right and far extremist groups broadly, or in the case of work on the ground in other contexts in Iraq with those who were in violent extremist groups in that context. And each trajectory is individual. But for example, as you mentioned about bullying, Maarten, what you do see is that there are also categories of life experiences which increase vulnerability. It doesn't mean that everyone who has those experiences will become radicalized or become extremist, but that amongst those who do become radicalized and extremist, you find very high prevalence of some of these experiences that they go through. So for example, in a case like bullying, it's not necessarily that everyone who's bullied will become radicalized towards violent extremism, but also we can see a social good in programming that can help to tackle and reduce bullying, which can both reduce vulnerabilities of that factor and increase well-being and resilience across many categories, not only in terms of prevention of violent extremism, but prevention of further violence, school dropout, self-harm, and many of the other negative effects which can come out of childhood and youth experiences of bullying. There was a question from Isabella again asking about, are there any lessons about failures or challenges that you would draw, things that were done, things that you experienced in the programming? Could be about ways of engaging with clients, could be about training and capacity of those working with clients. It could be about any aspect of it, but things that you, either while doing it or through the evaluation, were able to identify, you know, these are things which if we did it today, we would do differently. And I'd like to take that question further and also to broaden it out to Maarten and Fenna with the breadth of experience that all three of you have. You mentioned that earlier, some of the challenges that exit programs face, and that these are brought up also with policy and other actors. If you were to draw from the breadth of your experience and look at designing programming now, could you each identify, for example, at least 3 key recommendations you would share with either colleagues and practitioners in other contexts, or if you're thinking nationally in the context of the Netherlands, looking at if you were designing these programs now, what would you perhaps do differently, either solving problems you faced or bringing in additional aspects which could make the programming more effective?
So I think one of the things we mentioned before is creating this theory of change. We sort of started in 2014, and it was quite urgent, and we just made this program on the go. So to reflect on that, I think it would be better to really think and plan out what kind of organization you want to be and on what types of extremism you want to focus. So it is, I earlier stated that we're really demand focused, which is why in the first few years, our organization was mainly focused on Islamic extremism or jihadism. And that's certainly changed in the last few years as well. And what you see is that radicalization and extremism, it is a phenomenon that's constantly changing and evolving. And that's why you have to constantly change and evolve your methods. And that is why one of the recommendations that I would also give, or maybe in retrospect change within our organization, is to implement earlier the knowledge hub of your organization. You have a broad spectrum of knowledge as well in your organization, and you really have to collect and save that data and to collect and save and share this knowledge with other programs as well and other organizations in the Netherlands or in your country on how to deal with radicalization and extremism, because it's a phenomenon that changes so quickly and that is very that has influences of all kinds of things that are going on in your country. So I think that it's very important to really get this notion of that you're next to being a counseling program, you also have this great knowledge and experience, and you really have to engage with other actors to share and collect this information. Yeah, for me that's one of the recommendations, I guess.
Yeah, for me there would be a few. I think the first one is very general but still very important, and that is humanize the clients, in the sense that very often we see, not within the programs, because most of the people working there do humanize them, but in the wording also, when it comes to when it's in the press, when it's in politics and so on, people are still being very much pushed into a certain direction. And for example, we have been working in projects where it was not allowed to say clients to people who were in these programs, but we had to say radicalized or extremist offenders or extremist individuals. And if you are talking to people like this, you also know that it's really difficult to change them, and they might feel offended and scapegoated. So humanization, I think, is a very important one. And I think the other one would be on sustainability, and sustainability in two aspects. That is, if you start a program like this, don't do it for just one small group and then say it's just a project and then we stop it. No, I think really this aftercare is one of the most pivotal points, because we know that de-radicalization and rehabilitation processes are not linear. It's not that about after a certain time you are clean and you are clean for life. So there's chance for relapse and further questions, and that needs this sustainability. And finally is that I think that at the end of the day, the most important knowledge which is needed in a rehab program is that people know about people and not about the ideology. Yes, you should know enough about the ideology so that you can understand what people are saying, what is behind this more like, say, encoded language. But where we saw in the beginning very much like people are Islamist, extremists, so we sent an imam and then we will put in the right religion and then we set off. That is simply not working because when you look at the risk factors, when you look at the harm done to people, it's very often more in other fields. And of course, you should work on religion as well, or you should work on another ideology. But it's really important to have this core elements about risk factors and protective factors on board.
And then maybe to add to that, also concerning risk and protective factors, of course, they are already included in the theory of change intrinsically, and we looked at them in the research. But I think I don't think it was a failure, but it's something we underestimated, is to actually make these factors concrete. So what are you actually going to measure, or what are you actually wanting to achieve, is something that seems like a very clear thing to do in advance, but it is it is often very vague. We mean, what does resilience mean? What does a good parenting style mean? So I think for me, the most important thing is to make things as concrete as possible, so that you have a lot of different options to look at. And it makes it easier to actually say something meaningful in the end, also in an evaluation. So I think that's for me the most important takeaway.
And that's incredibly interesting and relevant, both in terms of within initiative and program design, and then the link between program design and implementation and evaluation, because we do sometimes have a tendency to use big words, big catch-all phrases. So resilience, safeguarding, protection, de-radicalization, but really breaking it down to what specifically do we mean by that? What are we working on? And what are indicators that can help us to be able to assess that, both to guide our programming, and then if you have that while you're doing the programming and you're monitoring that, that can also help support when you're doing the evaluation after. So to make it as moving away sometimes from big headlines, to make it as tangible and as specific and context relevant as possible. Could I ask Fenna and Martin, you know, the series, the knowledge series, which this is part of, is within the context of the Indeed project, where we're really focusing on how to advance evidence-based evaluation. And part of that has been looking at also trying to understand what's being done in evaluation at the moment, try to look at different experiences in evaluation from within the PVE, CVE, de-radicalization fields, but also from other fields, and to see what can we learn to be able to do evaluations better and to strengthen the evidence-based aspect of that, meaning that how do we make sure our evaluations are rigorous enough, that we have the validation, that we can actually say that these insights are things that you can say, yes, this is evidence. I'd like to ask, for your experience as evaluators within this initiative, are there lessons that you would draw from it for your own evaluation process? And Amber, as someone who had evaluation done to your initiative, are there lessons you would draw for what you need from evaluators, or what you can do in your own initiative design and implementation to support evaluation in the future?
Perhaps as a start, I think it's very important, and I was really glad that this happened also with this project we evaluated. It was at the right time, in the sense that there was certainty about the future financing, and it was not at the end of the project where even if you would have very good ideas, that they never could have been implemented again. And the other thing is that the organization can be very nervous about evaluators on the working floor if you're doing this on the end, if there's any uncertainty about the funding. That's one point. The other thing is what we were looking for, and we have found this, we found quite some information about evaluation, but we still don't have evaluation standards, in the sense that and I know this is also where you're aiming for at Indeed, but this already starts very often with the question, what is extremism, what is radicalization? And from there, you will get it that you will never get these standards. But what we at least try to do, and I was really glad that we could do this also with LSE, is that we are completely out in the open with the data and so on, and also with the report, so that at least that allows people to look at it and also to compare. But it would be even better if people would do evaluations in the same way, so that you then really could compare between certain projects, and from this you could learn. I know there have been initiatives now in Germany where there are some projects have been evaluated in a similar way. And I do think that really should be done more to learn from each other. So I think these are two very, very important markers. And what I really liked, perhaps as a final one, is that in this case, we were not being commissioned by the ministry, but we were commissioned by the exit units themselves. And of course, in the supervisory board, there were people from the ministry. And in the end of the day, we are being commissioned by the ministry over the exit unit, who is being commissioned by the ministry. But that at least gave a closer relationship, and that we are in this sense, we were much more on the same page than if you would have had this more like formal commissioner on board.
I'd really like to echo that. And I would like to make one additional point, is that I think it's, as an evaluator, it is good to keep in mind to, of course, look at your research questions, but in addition to also make recommendations and help practitioners to collect their data well. Because this is not necessarily something that all institutions are constantly working on, because they have their practical work as well, and they do gather data, but not always in a way that it's very relevant or that it's very useful for evaluators. So in addition to the research questions, we also had an entire list of recommendations on how to make your data set even further developed, even more useful for future evaluation. So in this way, you can keep on developing evaluations for the future. So it's something that I think for evaluators should be in the back of their minds when they do an evaluation.
Yes, and to add to that from an evaluated perspective, I think one of the important things were that the evaluation was mainly focused on this learning experience, being this learning experience, and to get the room also from the funder to being involved in commissioning the evaluation and to think about how the evaluation should be set up was a very important factor. And I think it is also an idea to in future evaluations to repeat this perspective as well, because when involving this learning experience, you really include the practitioners as well, and you get them also more motivated to participate in this evaluation and to really understand how this involves their work, how does this have an effect on their work and on their methods that they use. And I think that was for our organization the most important, to really get this learning experience and to also getting the other stakeholders involved on board on this view that it, next to accountability, that the learning experience for the own organization is very very important.
Should be right.
Perhaps to add one sentence, I think one of the, at least for me as an evaluator on this project, one of the good things is that we had a final presentation, a very long one, together with all the staff of the exit unit. And they also had all the place for critical questions and so on. So that also to close this procedure, because you come in, you have to gain the trust, you have to work on it together, but also to finish it by really explaining it to the people who work at the expert unit, what you have been writing down, and also to hear from their insecurities when it comes to our recommendations. I think that's also a very good advice always to do. Not only tell in the boardroom or tell to the people who commission, but also tell the people who were involved in the research what the outcome is and why you have written down this, because this also will increase the acceptance also of the recommendations, I believe.
Thank you so much for speaking directly to that now, the importance of learning and how we utilize the results from evaluation. And this is one of the areas that we're really trying to engage with to innovate and improve practice in the field. We've seen that quite often evaluations are carried out and then you do report it to the executive, to the donor, to the leadership, but practitioners, those involved in implementing it, or also communities or stakeholders that are affected by it, often don't find or hear, don't receive what are the learnings, what are the insights, or have the spaces to engage. And we're really trying to engage with the field broadly to look at how can we innovate and improve our approach to sharing and utilizing the results from evaluation. How can we take lessons that have been identified from one evaluation or one program so that practitioners either within the same city or country, in the sector, in other sectors, or those in other countries can learn from these experiences so that we can build forward better together, being able to identify sometimes mistakes which we don't need to make, or learn from good practices that can help us. You also spoke about quality standards in evaluation, which is something that is so important to work to advance. In the Indeed tool, there is a guide, a checklist to look at some of those quality standards that can help us as evaluators or as agencies commissioning evaluation. So as you go through the tool, practically brings you to a point when you're preparing your evaluation to look at quality standards and some things that can be important to think of. There's also been a proposal which could fit well with what you were saying, Martin, by one of our colleagues, Stefan Kloss. He was the lead on creating the repository of risk and protective factors in the project, which gathers together evaluations and articles, scientific research, more than 250 publications. And with the repository, you can extract and identify what are identified risk factors and what are protective factors. He's subsequently come with the proposal of creating a repository of evaluations in the PCVE field, where we can collect both evaluations that have been completed, but also collect a repository on approaches, on methods that can be used in evaluation to help to support both evaluators and the agencies and institutions having that evaluation done. I would like to thank all three of you so much for sharing so richly. This itself also is a wonderful way to bring out and to help to share the learning from programming and the learning from evaluation. And thank you very much for all that you've shared with us today in this Indeed webinar. Thank you also to all of our audience that's joining us both directly here and in the streaming of the webinar. Now, in the last moments, I'm just going to share with everyone some of the upcoming events that we have, in case these may be of interest. If you've enjoyed today's webinar and would like to know about future opportunities. First, for today's webinar, there will be a learning note which will be produced, extracting some of the key highlights in just 1 to 2 pages to be able to share that further with practitioners. It will also be put up shortly on the Knowledge Hub of the Indeed website, so if you'd like to make it available to other colleagues. Then for some upcoming events, we have cascade trainings that are now taking place in countries all across the European Union. You'll find updates and information on those available on the Indeed website. There are cascade trainings in France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, Finland, Latvia, Bulgaria, and other countries planned. So if you're interested in receiving training yourself on evidence-based evaluation or design of evidence-based initiatives, some of these opportunities might be of interest to you. We'll also be launching in the coming months the online e-learning courses. There will be 2 different courses. One will be on designing evidence-based evaluation. The other will be on designing evidence-based initiatives. These courses are designed to be available to take at your pace. They'll be available in 10 languages. And you can also draw upon these resources together with the training support package to provide training in person as well. And the materials in the Indeed project are designed to be modular, so you can take the 2-day trainings as a whole, or you can identify from the training curricula specific materials, specific content, and use those to integrate them into training that you already have in the field. Also, now in June on the 27th and 28th, we'll have the Indeed Policy Forum online. The first day on the 27th, we'll be focusing on engaging with policy and the policy field and policymakers and looking at the importance of policy in the PCVE evaluation field, the need for support, the need for policymakers to understand the importance of evaluation and making that link between practitioners, evaluation and learning, and policy development. On the second day, June 28th, we will have a very interesting session on evolving a community of practice amongst evaluators in the field so that we can help to share, learn, and improve the quality of evaluation. And then we will have a session with agencies and organizations interested in the upcoming final event of Indeed and the second International Policy and Practitioners Forum. That will be an online session on the 28th where we'll be introducing this final event, looking at the sessions plan, and inviting agencies who would like to take part in Warsaw to discuss with us about possible topics and presentations they would like to have there. We also have a policy recommendations workshop in Riga on July 12th, bringing together policymakers from local and national authorities and the European Commission and others from across the EU to work together to advance policy support. and, as I mentioned, the second International Forum from Evidence to Practice towards Improved Policy and Practice in the Field. I mentioned at the beginning JELSA, gender, ethical, legal, and societal aspects. These are themes that we try to advance in all of our work in the Indeed project. Indeed, you have them built into the evaluation tool and also the guide for designing initiatives, the importance to look at how do we engage with issues of gender, ethics, and legal and societal aspects. And I really appreciated, Amber, you spoke to ethical aspects. Martin, you also mentioned and had some comments on the gender dimensions of the work that's being done. And we would invite people, if you can, we will share this not only now on the screen, but also in the note that will be sent to you following this webinar. We'll provide all of these resources and links to them, as well as an evaluation for the webinar itself. But for now, on behalf of the entire Indeed consortium, I'd like to say thank you once again to Amber, Fenna, and Martin. Thank you for the work that you do every single day, the work that you shared with us, and taking that time today to share it. And thank you to our participants and colleagues who have joined in today's webinar. We hope that it has been interesting and useful for you in your work, and we wish you the very best going forward.